Afternoon, everybody. Again, thanks, as Kirsten said, for making your way to today's second office hours lunchtime meeting. Just a few acknowledgements first. Those members present, we have Eric Thorburn, OID, John Davids, MID, Gordon Enos, MID, Samantha Wookie, MID, Walt Ward, Stanislaus County, and Miguel Alvarez with the City of Modesto. Thank you for being here. If I've missed anybody, maybe we can catch you in a moment. There's a couple of formatting things, some speakers today. First is Phyllis Stannon. She will be speaking on the sustainable management criteria that you see on your screen now. Also, there's going to be some Q&A today. That's really important to hear what our stakeholders think and some of the questions they may have. To answer your questions, we have Eric Thorburn, Water Operations Manager and District Engineer with Oakdale Irrigation District. We have myself, Michael, with the City of Oakdale, and then Phyllis Stannon, Vice President, Principal Geologist at Todd Groundwater. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kirsten.
Thanks. And I'm Kirsten Pringle. I'm with Stantec. I'm an outreach consultant hired to support public outreach and engagement related to the development of the GSP. I'm just going to quickly go over some housekeeping things, go over the format of today's meeting, and tell you how you can participate. So if you were at the last office hours, I think a couple of our participants today we're going to do things a little differently today to respond to feedback that we received. So at the last office hours, it was pretty broad. We just kind of wanted to see what questions people had. Today, we're going to focus it a little more and talk about specifically sustainable management criteria, because that's where the GSAs are in the process of developing their GSP. So we're going to start with a brief presentation from Phyllis on sustainable management criteria, just providing a quick overview and reminder of what sustainable management criteria is, and then also an update on where they are in the GSP development process. We'll then move into a question and answer session. So we have, again, Michael, Eric, and Phyllis will be our main speakers today. But if you have questions specific to your GSA, I think we have all, if not most, of the GSA representatives on the line. So I think we can answer those as well. We'll start by answering any questions you have about sustainable management criteria. And then at the end, there'll be plenty of time to answer any other questions on STGBA. We'll just try to answer all this stuff in sustainable management criteria at first. And then finally, a note that today's meeting is being recorded at the crest at the last office hours, and we'll be posting a recording on the website after. And then both myself and my colleague, Casey Clark, who you see here today, are also taking notes. So we'll be providing our notes to the planning staff after the meeting so they can consider it in development of the GSP. And we'll also be creating a summary of today's office hours for those that were unable to attend, and that will go along with the recording. There are two primary ways to ask questions today. The first one is that you can raise your hand in the meeting, and then once you raise your hand, that I will open it up for you to open your microphone, and then you can ask your questions and have dialogue with their GSA representatives. These office hours are meant to be a little more informal than the meeting, so we really encourage just to have an open dialogue back and forth. Feel free to ask a lot of follow-up questions. We just ask that in between, if you're not speaking, that you mute your microphone just to cut out any background noise and make it easier for everybody to hear. The best ways to raise your hand, I'll be looking at the participants list. So if you open the participant screen, you should have an option that says raise hand. You may also have an option, depending on which version of Zoom you have, to provide reactions. And I believe there's a raise hand feature in them as well. I'll be able to see both, so whatever is easier for you. If you have any issues with the raise hand feature, or if you're having issues with your audio, the second way you can provide questions is typing it in the chat window. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a button that says chat. It kind of looks like a talk bubble. If you click on that, you should have a chat box that looks just like this, and you can type in your question at the end. You can choose to send it to everyone, so everyone on this call will see it, or in the drop-down menu where it says to, it may say something like send to meeting organizers, and that will just be sent to me. And then I will read your question out loud into the record, and everyone will respond. So again, the two ways to provide input, either raise your hand and I will ask you to open up your mic, or you can type it into the chat window and I will read it out loud for you and our representatives will respond. Before we move on to Phyllis's presentation, does anyone have any questions about how to participate or the format for today's event? All right, hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis. Phyllis, just let me know when you want me to advance through the slides.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kirsten. And hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you so much for joining us today. I thought I would just give us a few slides to provide some context of sort of what's been done so far, where we are, and some background or a little overview on the sustainable management criteria. We want this to be informal, but I just thought that this would provide a little bit of context and get us all on the same page. So what you're looking at right here is the schedule for the multi-year GSP. Everything that's highlighted in yellow are the tasks or the activities that we've already completed. So you can see that just from the words that are on these tasks, you can sort of think of these as chapters in your GSP, that a lot of the work that's been done to date is really technical. It's hydrogeological. We've looked at groundwater conditions in the basin, and the big push, really the heavy lift, is development of that local numerical model. So we now have a tool, an integrated surface water and groundwater model, to help us analyze these groundwater conditions and water budgets. Right now, you can see the sort of here we are. And if you'll go to the next one, Kirsten will next slide. Kirsten will highlight the activities that we're working on now. And so you can see that there are a lot of concurrent activities. We're working on sustainable management criteria, along with development of projects and management actions that are going to support sustainable management. The monitoring networks are also a key activity right now because they're going to be combined with the sustainable management criteria to help us monitor for these sustainable management issues in the future. And then the last GSP plan development is just sort of putting everything together. So we're really doing a lot right now. And we're going to focus a little bit on the sustainable management criteria first. And what you can see here is that even though there are tons of information, you might have seen guidance documents or best management practices, the regulations are full of requirements and details for sustainable management criteria. But in brief, it's really just boiled down to these kind of four things. The first is a sustainability goal, a sort of mission for the subbasin, sort of where we're headed and what are the things that we really want to achieve. Undesirable results is a new term under STRGBA, and it has to do with groundwater conditions that we want to avoid or prevent in the subbasin. Minimum threshold is a term that we set with respect to our groundwater conditions in order to avoid these undesirable results. It can be a water level, it can be a volume of groundwater that we want to either protect or avoid losing. There's a variety of metrics, and we'll look at that in just a second. And then finally, the last sustainable management criteria is really the measurable objectives. This is where we want to be. Minimum threshold says where we don't want to be. Measurable objectives gives us a sort of target for groundwater conditions of what we would like to be able to maintain or improve on in the subbasin. And so if we go to the next slide, we'll be able to see what the sustainability goal has been developed for the Modesto Subbasin. This is long and a lot of words, but let's just look at the first sentence because I think that really sets the tone. The sustainability goal of the Modesto Subbasin GSP is to provide a sustainable groundwater supply for the local community and for the economic vitality of the region. I don't have to tell you guys that, as urban growth is continuing to expand in the subbasin, groundwater is a very important resource for drinking water supply. It also supports local industries and in particular is a huge, huge benefit for the agricultural economy that has really developed throughout this region. So these are important to the GSAs, and they want to recognize the need and the significance of the local shared groundwater resources. And so what are we going to do to get to this goal? Well, there's a variety of things that we have listed here in bullets. And essentially, it all boils down to monitoring groundwater levels, storage, and quality, and actively managing it such that we can achieve these objectives that are shown here. Operate the basin within its sustainable yield, so we want to avoid overdraft conditions, for example. The second bullet says that we'd like to maintain a reliable, accessible, and high-quality groundwater supply, especially during droughts. Those of us who have been through the 2015 drought have seen water level declines and some impacts from that. The GSAs want to manage groundwater levels so that beneficial uses of interconnected surface water are not adversely impacted. We recognize that groundwater and surface water are managed conjunctively in this subbasin, and a very important component of all of this is to be able to have those surface water resources maintained for the future so that we can optimize conjunctive management of local surface water and groundwater. And then there's some things we want to avoid as well. For example, future potential land subsidence is a possibility in the subbasin. It's certainly not anything that has been of significance historically or even currently, but we recognize that there are so many places in the Central Valley where this has been a big issue. We do have the Corcoran clay in our subbasin. I'm sure you've heard of this. It is a subsurface clay lens, and we want to avoid dewatering that clay lens. And what has been seen in other parts of the Central Valley is that has been a big issue with respect to land subsidence. So it's going to be something to monitor and manage. And then finally, we recognize that along our river boundaries, we are hydraulically connected to others. So we're not just in this sustainable management process ourselves, we're in it with a lot of other GSAs in the neighboring subbasins. So one of our objectives is to coordinate and to cooperate with all of those adjacent subbasins so that we can avoid undesirable results together. Next slide, please. These are the 6 sustainability indicators, and DWR has developed little icons. You might have seen them. So we have little pictures there at the top that talk about groundwater conditions. And we use these indicators to determine which of these do we want to avoid and why, and how that might indicate undesirable results. So you can see that the 6 are there: chronic lowering of water levels, reduction of groundwater and storage, seawater intrusion, degraded water quality, land subsidence, and surface water depletion. And so if we go to the next slide, I've added just a few little things at the bottom of this that give you a little bit of insight into some of the approaches that we've considered and reviewed. If you've attended any of the TAC meetings over the last year or so, we've been pulling together some of this information. And I'll just quickly go through these. For chronic lowering of water levels, one of the things that we'd like to do in this subbasin is really to maintain our water levels such that we don't have long-term declines. We recognize that we're going to be using our groundwater resources during droughts, so water levels could decline then. So we need that buffer. And maintaining our historic low water levels seems to be a good approach that we have been exploring for the subbasin. For reduction of groundwater and storage, obviously we want to mitigate overdraft so that we sustain groundwater for the future. Seawater intrusion is really not applicable to our subbasin, and under the regulations, we're not required to set any sustainable management criteria. The GSAs have already determined that it's not applicable, so you probably won't hear anything about that from us going forward. With respect to the degraded water quality, there's already so much going on in our subbasin with respect to other existing monitoring programs. So one of the real objectives of this GSP is to confer and coordinate with what's already being done. So we don't duplicate, we don't reinvent a wheel, and we don't take responsibility away from the primary agencies who are regulating groundwater quality. For land subsidence, I mentioned already the Corcoran clay. We want to prevent future impacts from occurring in our subbasin. So some of that will be commensurate with management of these water levels. And we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. And then finally, again, emphasizing surface water depletion is a very a big concern for the subbasin because the surface water resources are such an important component of sustainability. So we want to consider and evaluate what amounts of groundwater have been contributing to our rivers and make sure that we maintain conditions where we're not depleting our surface water. The next slide. This shows a little graph that was developed by the Department of Water Resources, and it helps put some of these things that we've just talked about into perspective, along with a couple of new terms. So what we're showing here is the blue line is a groundwater level. It might be something monitored in a well. And then you see this green area, which is called the area below a minimum threshold. This is our area of undesirable results. So for a variety of reasons, we might decide that we don't really want to go below that green line, at least with too many wells and for too long of a time. And so we will think about how we set this up with respect to the 20-year implementation period. So our GSP is being submitted in 2022. But we have 20 years to achieve sustainability. So that measurable objective at the end of that 20-year period, that's sort of our goal. Again, it's where we want our groundwater conditions to be on average conditions. And so to get there, we have interim milestones. And in this particular example, we see that interim milestones actually allow for continued declines in some time periods, to go below a minimum threshold, as long as we're able to recover. And so you can see how the interim milestones sort of stack up there in what is often called a glide path, or a way that we envision our groundwater levels changing over time to get to this average measurable objective condition. So that sort of pulls some of these terms that you've heard us talk about kind of into a diagram. And then the next slide sort of moves us into how are we going to achieve all this stuff? Well, the sustainability goal, again, will be achieved over that 20-year implementation period. We anticipate a robust monitoring program. There's actually already one in place with about 50 wells already being monitored, and we're going to supplement that over time. And then a series of projects and management actions. These primarily involve variations of groundwater recharge projects, as well as in-loose surface water use. So these two terms together give us the opportunity to achieve that optimization of conjunctive management that we talked about earlier, being the conjunctive use of surface water and groundwater. Of course, there are other important projects and management actions involving conservation, for example, stormwater management in areas where we have flooding and we need water. Doesn't that tell us something that we can put together stormwater management along with water resource management? So that is an important component as well. And the city's already done a lot of work on that. And then there are other strategies that are being developed now and will be developed and modified over time through a concept called adaptive management. Adaptive management is very important to us, and what it means is this. This is a plan going forward, but we may not guess correctly exactly how this basin should be managed. And so we're going to monitor, watch the details, reevaluate our undesirable results in annual reports and in 5-year reassessments of the plan. And that will give us the opportunity to adapt both to things that we don't know now, but also changing conditions within the subbasin with respect to issues such as climate change, for example. So that's a little overview of sort of what we've been doing recently and where we're headed. And just wanted to throw that out to get us all on the same page. But the more important portion of this is questions from you. So please, if anybody has any questions, either on the information you've seen or anything else, then let's get started.
Thanks, Phyllis. So I'll just remind everyone how to ask questions. You can either use the hand raise feature, which you can do if you click on the participants window in Zoom, or I believe in reactions, You should have a hand raise feature as well, and I'll be monitoring those. If you raise your hand, I'll just ask you to unmute your mic, or you can type your questions into the chat box, either by sending them to everyone or just the organizers. Either way, I'll receive it, and I'm happy to read the question out loud for you, and then I'll ask you if you want to unmute your microphone as well. So we'll start off by answering any questions you may have about sustainable management criteria, and also probably projects and management actions, since those are related, and I know the GSAs are working on identifying those as well. So does anyone want to start us off with questions on sustainable management criteria? Well, I have a couple questions I can ask to get us going, of course. So I'll just throw this out to Eric, Michael, and Phyllis, and I'll let you guys decide who want to answer it. Could you guys, so obviously we're in the middle of a drought, as everybody knows. And, you know, as time goes on and climate change happens, it's projected in many areas that we're going to have extended droughts. So a question I hear a lot at many public workshops and meetings is, how is climate change being incorporated and considered in development of the GSP? So could you talk a little bit about that?
You want to take that, Phyllis, or you want me to? I can jump in a little bit. I know we have projected future hydrologic conditions in the Modesto Subbasin, both with and without climate change. And really, we know what could happen, and we're going to be ready to adapt to it. But we really haven't planned for those things. We've planned to adapt to them, to accommodate them, but we really haven't incorporated them into the plan to react to them until they've happened. Let's put it that way. They're really kind of uncertain. Is that correct, Phyllis? Is that about right?
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. And just to expand on that a little bit, and that's one of the things that I was trying to think about when I mentioned adaptive management, is to give us the opportunity to have a flexible plan so that we're ready to adapt to any changing conditions that we see going forward. But Eric's right. You know, we've got a lot of things that we've already identified in our subbasin that's happening that we want to address initially as a priority. And we're going to go for those things first, obviously. And then we're going to continue to monitor. And we'll be working with the GSAs to make sure that we have enough information to know when things are changing and how things are changing, and then to adapt to that as we go. So yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. And not seeing any hands up from the audience yet, so I'll ask another question. We talk a lot about these minimum thresholds, and obviously that's not what you want to go under, but what will happen if a groundwater condition in the subbasin does go under the minimum threshold, or gets close to going under? How do you track that, and what will happen? What mechanisms are in place if it drops below the minimum threshold?
I can take that as well if you'd like. So I think the main thing is monitoring closely what conditions we're seeing in the subbasin throughout this plan. We're going to initially start with some minimum thresholds and also some criteria that along the way we need to meet, we're expecting to meet. If we drop below those points, then we're going to have to adapt to what we're seeing. So it's really about having that flexibility, starting with a plan and then adapting to that with different management actions. One of the concerns right now is obviously the east, and we have some overdraft in the basin, and we need to address that. So we might have different management actions in different zones. We're going to talk about that a lot more in the next few meetings, in the next few monthly meetings. So I'd encourage public input and participation at those meetings. Those are really kind of things that we're going to have a toolbox, and we're going to start pulling from that toolbox. And as you know, if things are worse than we projected, then we're going to have to kind of ratchet down and do more management and more management actions and more projects.
And I can say something too, so Eric doesn't steal the show. And that's, first of all, some gratitude to Miguel Alvarez and the city of Modesto for doing our monitoring wells, and really difficult to be fleet of foot and adaptive if we don't have the real-time data that these monitoring wells will provide us. So just kudos to Miguel on that.
And I know there are a lot of questions at the Lost Office Hours about monitoring. Could you talk a little more about, or just touch on the long-term monitoring that the subbasin is doing to manage these conditions, or not manage them, to track how the GSP is adapting to these conditions?
Yeah, I'll jump in there on this one, Kristen. So the thing that that we're going to be doing, Michael just mentioned it actually, that we have 11 locations and 17 brand new wells going in right now. We've got everything done but the last one, and we have just a couple of modifications to the next to the last one. So we're so close here to having all of these new wells, but we also have a pretty robust system in place. It doesn't cover us absolutely everywhere we need information, which is why we've been supplementing it with this new program. But for years, we've been monitoring the CASGEM program. So we have about 50 wells in the subbasin that are already monitored semi-annually for water levels. There are also additionally 19 wells that the city of Modesto has been using to be able to track changes in water levels and water quality in their well fields. And they have generously offered to allow the GSAs to incorporate some of those monitoring wells into our monitoring network as well. And then finally, the USGS has been in the subbasin on several occasions doing a variety of things. They have about 30 additional wells, and those wells are potentially, we're working with USGS now to see how best to incorporate those wells, but those wells are also available, and they are nice because they are dedicated monitoring wells. They were drilled as in monitoring wells, as was the city of Modesto wells, and as is this new program. So we have a pretty robust program in place. Hydrogeologists are always going to tell you we need a little bit more data than we've got. But I feel comfortable telling you that we have had this subbasin has done a good job in tracking its groundwater conditions up until now. And so we had a lot of good information. It's not the same in all of these subbasins that we have this kind of information to be able to work backwards to look at the historical conditions to say, how did we get here? And then to incorporate a new big program of where we're going. So, one of the things that we're continuing to do, of course, is to adapt our monitoring network to our needs. And so one of our management actions is going to be continually improving the monitoring network over time. Even though I can count a bunch of wells, we maybe don't need every single one of them, and we maybe need a little bit more in certain areas. So things are going to be changing, but I feel good about where we're headed and how we're starting off the plan.
Great, thanks, Phyllis. And I see a question in the chat box. I'm going to read it out loud. Brad Johnson asks, can something be done with the high nitrate city wells that are offline to be helpful to areas with lower groundwater levels? Perhaps sell it for use only for farming. So just repeat it. Can something be done with the high nitrate city wells that are offline to be helpful with areas with lower groundwater levels? Erica, Michael, do you want to take that, or do you want to have Phyllis respond?
Yeah, I'm going to need Phyllis on this.
Yeah, here's what I'll say. I think we just had Mr. Brad Johnson. Thank you. We haven't met yet, but I think we have a nice project that has just been proposed that we can consider. I think this is really nice thinking, because the city has had so many wells that have had to go offline for various reasons. They have been managing their water quality issues very well, but we have had a lot of challenges, both from naturally occurring constituents, such as deep uranium, for example, as well as some of these additional legacy issues with respect to nitrate and some other constituents. So recognizing that you maybe can't drink it, but if the well is offline and available for management, then incorporating that into a sort of management action. I think we've got some thinking to do there. So I think that that's a potential management action that we need to consider, and I've just jotted that down. So this office hour so far is helping me as much as it's helping you. So thank you, Mr. Johnson.
So I will add too that the city of Oakdale, I'm pretty sure is the same way, because OID is around the city of Oakdale, but the city of Oakdale is within OID. But we really we have very isolated and very few issues with nitrates in our area. We're a little bit farther east of those areas. But I will add that the Water Quality Coalition also are making efforts to monitor nitrates, the movement, the quantities. A lot of the domestic well owners are required to turn in samples, notify the landowners, that sort of thing. So there is an effort that is being made there, and we don't want to be redundant there. We don't want to have costs, repetitive costs, and be doing the same thing. We want to utilize that information and work together with them. So we will be doing that.
And we have another question in the audience. Allison and Dave both share. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Ask, we are interested in the work being done today on fees charged to landowners. Have the fees been set?
So we haven't talked about fees yet. Well, we've had very brief discussions about fees that have just come up at the end of meetings during some questions from the public, but we haven't formally discussed those yet. I think the main thing is, we've got the model now, we've established the groundwater conditions, we've got a water budget. We're really focusing on getting the sustainable management criteria done over the next several meetings, establishing those monitoring networks, moving into a plan that has some implementation outlined on it, and the approach outlined on it. And then at that point, then we'll start talking about fees, because we'll know a little bit more about what projects need to be done, what areas those projects need to be done, and where those management actions need to take place. Right now, the grant is, or the plan rather, is being covered by a grant. So there aren't a whole lot of costs other than the agency's time and things like that. So we're kind of in it together right now to come up with a plan. And once we know where those costs are, then I think we need to talk about fees and where they would be allocated, and who would end up paying those.
Yeah, Eric, precisely. I was thinking the same thing. You mentioned the word grant on accident, but the grant's really important when it comes to water recharge, stormwater projects. Any of those, we have 9 discharges to the river, and I know Riverbank, I don't believe, has many, so they do a real good job with water recharge. That would be something that Oakdale would be really, it'd be advantageous for us to do that. Especially because we have other things to check off too, in terms of water quality and reducing the less than 5 millimeter debris into the river. There's going to be some projects we're going to need to do in terms of the water board's requirement. And so we're going to be looking for grants. And so I think you're right, as we start to really chew this data up and start to see how, what those practical things are to maintain the basin. It's what projects first are grant funded, at least for Oakdale.
And I know funding is a very popular topic. It came out a lot at our last office hours. How can people like Allison, Dave, and others on the line stay engaged in these discussions as you move along and do start talking about fees or how you're going to fund GSP implementation?
There's a lot of ways for the public to be involved. I think one of the most important ways is through the monthly meetings that we have. So we have those meetings, the third Tuesday of every month, I think?
Second
Second
Wednesday.
Second Tuesday of every month. Sorry,
Second Wednesday.
Wednesday, sorry, got a lot of meetings. So that's the most important thing is attending those public meetings, I think. But also, online we have a lot of information. The agencies are doing their part to try and inform their boards. We have our own website, OID website, that we have a dedicated link and page for the SGMA process. And there's a lot of ways for people to get information and voice their opinions and get their input in. Over the next few months, we're definitely going to be putting out some more sections of the GSP so that people can review that as they go. So I think it's important that they have the time to review that, and by putting it out section by section, it'll be a little bit less burdensome in doing that. So hopefully they can read those and get some thoughts into us so we can incorporate those comments into the plan before adoption.
Right.
Yeah, great. Now just throw in STRGBA.org. STRGBA.org.
Yeah. And Phyllis, you talked about earlier in this meeting, we spent a lot of time collecting data, and you showed your flow chart there, and now it's about setting thresholds and determining what are those indicators and things. And so now it's imperative that we as the agencies get the word out, and we'll start, like Eric said, start posting those things online, doing info items at our councils and boards, because the technical thing, I could bring a half-hour technical info item, but it meant nothing yet, really,
right.
So to speak. The nerds in the room, really, we care about that, right? And can we trust the data, and we do all that. But now that we're trusting the data, we know we have a really good, history of this data and what is it we're going to do now. Really important to be talking about those things, and that's what the City of Oakdale has. First Monday and third Monday of the month, we're going to be having these info items as we start to determine what it is we're going to do.
Thanks.
And that's another opportunity, even at those meetings, for public to attend those meetings and provide comments and feedback and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah.
And I posted a link that Phyllis was referencing, specifically the page to the meeting list. So if you are interested, the meeting agendas, the Subbasin does a really great job of posting all the packet of information they're going to be discussing ahead of the meeting. So you can always look at the agendas ahead of time and get an idea of what they're going to be discussing if that's something that you're interested in. And as also mentioned, I think signing up for the mailing list is probably the best way to keep informed without having to attend the monthly meetings, because they send a lot of information out through that mailing list. So just stay tuned for that. Does any members of the public want to unmute their microphone or have any other questions? If not, I have one final one we can leave off on.
Yeah, this is Dennis Whitfield. Can you see the chat that I just typed in?
I cannot, Dennis, but we can hear you. So go ahead. Sorry if I missed it.
Okay, we are farming on the east side along Crabtree Road. And we're contemplating redeveloping an orchard out there. And we're wondering what would be the likelihood of specific limitation on pumping in that area before 2042.
So Dennis, as I mentioned, we are in overdraft currently in this basin, and the largest contributor to that is the eastern ag developed areas. The county already has, the ordinance which precludes new wells going in without the CEQA process being completed. So it's already difficult to put in new wells. But if you're talking about existing wells and cutting back those landowners that are out there on the east side currently, there's two options. You can generate new sources of supply. There's obviously some limitations there, but you might be able to get some local out-of-district water to throw into that mix, or some stormwater recapture projects that could be done, or the other alternative is to reduce demand, like you're talking about. So we haven't gotten to the point of really determining exactly what projects and management actions are going to be done. So I don't have a direct answer for you and a definitive answer for you yet, but there is definitely the potential of that occurring out there, given that they are already in overdraft, and they are the biggest contributor to overdraft in this basin.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Eric. Thanks. It's helpful. Any idea of what would be the earliest time some of those specific, like say, limitations might occur?
Another tough question. It really depends. We have those interim milestones. So 5 years into this project, we have our first interim milestone. So that essentially is a whole, we kind of come back, we do this process again. We've got a plan to work with at that point. So it's easier to do this whole process again. But we're going to update everything. We're going to see where we're at and where we projected in comparison in relation to where we projected we were going to be. And, if we're way below where we were projected to be, then we're going to have to do more projects and management actions to get us back to where we ultimately wanted to be, unless we change the goal and change the set point. So it'd be hard. I can't tell you when it's going to happen. The sooner those projects happen, either increased supply or reduced demand, the sooner those happen, the better off we're going to be. I can tell you that, but I don't know. That's tough to say. Depends on how bad things get. If we have a bunch of droughts in a row and we see things getting real bad and a lot of pumping over in the east, more than we projected, then that's not going to be good. And things will probably have to happen. They will definitely have to happen sooner than later.
Is it fair to say that it would not happen prior to the 5-year interim goal review?
I couldn't answer that definitively.
Okay, thanks.
And Allison and Dave have a really great follow-up question touching on what you're just talking about, Eric. They asked, how severe is the overdraft in the east side? And I know Phyllis may be able to give some of the details on this too, since she's been kind of mired in the technical work.
Yeah, I know basin-wide average annual decline is 43,000 acre feet, something along those lines. I don't know how much of that is specifically out of that east side. Do you have numbers in front of you there, Phyllis?
I should know these by heart, and you would think that as many times as we've been over them, that I would have them known by heart, but I don't have it right in front of me, but I am going to pull it up, and just give me a second and we'll be able to talk about it in a little more detail here. I mean, one of the things that we've been trying to do is look at the water budget with respect to areas to the extent that we can, so that we can target what we need, when, and where. Let's see. Here we go. I've got more information. Yeah, what I pulled up still doesn't. You're right about the total subbasin, about 43,000 acre feet a year, and most of that is in the east non-district areas. And I can get a little bit better handle on that, but I pulled up the wrong thing. So maybe we can continue on, and I will continue to look for my details on that, and I'll let you know when I get there.
No problem. We'll loop back to Allison and Dave's question in a minute and give Phyllis some time to pull up her slides. Did anyone have any other follow-up questions or things that we haven't touched on yet? Feel free to just unmute your mic too. That seems to be easier for people. Well, if Phyllis poses a slide, I always like kind of to have a next up type of question. So we talked about we're in the middle of developing the sustainable management criteria. There's been some stuff that has been done thus far, but you guys are by no means completed with it. So can you guys talk a little more about what are the next steps in developing the sustainable management criteria, just so people on the line, if they're interested, can stay engaged?
You want to start on that, Michael, or you want me to jump in there?
Yeah, I'm not developing it, so yeah, I'm going to have to leave that to Phyllis or you. I don't.
Well, I could say, so like I said, we've done the model. We know the groundwater conditions now. We've done the water budgets. We're working on sustainable management criteria. We need to set up those monitoring networks and then ultimately come up with an approach as far as implementation and projects and management actions. So in the next few meetings, the real focus is going to be the sustainable management criteria. And along with that, our monitoring networks for each of those. So I think that is really what people need to be aware of and involved in, because that's really, this is the hardest part. In my opinion, this is the hardest part. We've got the data. Now we need to figure out where we want to be, and then and get those public comments in, and flesh out the concerns and ideas and those sorts of things. So that's the goal right now. And then obviously we need to keep our eye on the ball, because January is going to be here quick. So we need to get this GSP out and make sure that we are in compliance and have a plan to at least start.
Great, thanks, Eric. So it's 1 o'clock now. I just want to be respectful. We'll just try to very quickly. Do you have any last minute information on that eastern side, Phyllis, that you want to share?
I do. So one of the things that we're working on right now is called a sustainable yield analysis. So the short answer for your question with respect to how much of it is in the east side is that it's a little bit difficult to go into the changes that occurred over the historical time period for that 43,000 acre feet a year, but it is most of it and more than half of it. And one of the things that we're working on right now is the changes in the groundwater system that we're projecting for the future, and what we can do locally to bring some areas back into sustainability. Part of the reason for kind of drawing a little circle around certain portions of the subbasin and trying to say what's this area is because, as we know, it's all hydraulically connected. And so what's happening over a lot of the areas that, for example, just to give you a sense of some of the things that we're looking at. So we have some seepage that's occurring from the bottom of Modesto Reservoir. So that's actually providing some recharge back to the groundwater basin that sort of complicates the issues of sort of trying to, again, draw a little circle around something and pull out just those numbers. We see a lot of conjunctive use that's happening in the OID area. So there's a lot of additional water going into the groundwater system and moving as subsurface flow again through the area. So we see some of those complications occurring, but what we're really focused on is how best to fix it. And to do that, we're looking at sustainable yield analysis in various portions of the basin, thinking, using the model to help us understand how is the groundwater system overall going to respond to recharge in a certain area. It's one thing to say, well, it's, this area is in deficit a certain amount of water, but the groundwater system isn't going to just assign every molecule to that area. So we have to think about how the water level is going to respond to the projects and how best to sort of optimize their locations and quantities. So I think that even though we have identified what's gone on with respect to the historical overdraft, I think the more important question is sort of how is it fixed? And in some cases, it takes a little bit more to fix it than the historical overdraft has been, evaluated. So, we're continuing to kind of narrow down and focus in on how much is it going to take to fix it.
And Kirsten, if I could, you asked a minute ago about the action plan and things, and we did share a list at a STRGBA meeting. I think maybe you have a slide, maybe you don't, but I think it could be important when we talk about. We just say projects and maybe we have pie in the sky ideas. They really aren't. They're actual real projects lists that we've been developing and looking at. And it might be important to those on this call to see some of the list of projects and management actions that we will continue to look at and develop over time.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. I just provided a link to the slides from Todd Groundwater that have the conceptual list of projects. And for people that want to look at them, they're on page 32 of the PDF, 32 and 33.
And maybe you can also see them. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Kristen? Yeah, so this is some of the beginning conjunctive use projects that we've been talking about and recharge projects that we've been talking about. And it gives you some kind of an idea about where we're headed.
Great. Well, we're past time. I want to be respectful, but because we didn't have our full hour today, because of some of the issues with the Zoom link, I did provide my personal email in the chat box. So if you have any questions we weren't able to get to today, feel free to email me and I will follow up with the GSA representatives and make sure to give you a response. But I want to thank everyone for participating. Like I said, we'll be posting a recording of this office hours on the STRGBA GSA website. And then we'll also be developing a summary that will have a written kind of summary about all the questions that were asked and any responses. And as always, if you have any feedback, ways to make this easier for you, a different meeting format that might be better, also feel free to email me that we're always trying to adjust these to make it as easy as possible for everyone. And unless there is any final thoughts, I just want to thank everyone and I hope everyone enjoys their weekend.
Thank you. And Phyllis and Eric, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Absolutely.
everyone.
Appreciate the public participation too.
Definitely.
Have a great weekend.
Bye,
Thanks
everybody.
all.